The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded twice, sealed with wax the color of dried blood, set upon the breakfast tray as if it were a piece of toast gone cold. She did not read it at once. She poured the tea from a pot, whose spout had a small chip that only she noticed anymore, and she permitted herself the small pleasure of pretending nothing had changed. The clock in the hall struck the hour with the calm indifference of a servant who had been in the house a very long time. Outside, on the other side of the tall drawing-room window, March in London was doing what March in London always does. It began grey without conviction, and ended grey with determination. The snow of February had already gone from the flagged court behind the house. What was left was the mud of an English spring that had not yet made up its mind. Selina Harcourt was 23, thin at the wrists, dressed in a morning gown of lead-grey wool, and possessed of a laugh she withheld before men who preferred it produced on cue. The house in Bruton Street had 2 floors of quiet at that hour, and a 3rd floor in which her mother was, at last, sleeping. Selina counted the seconds between one small cough on the floor above and the next. She had learned, without meaning to count them the way a sailor counts the swell. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening to this story from. The city, the hour. I read every one. And if these stories of dukes and ladies make your heart breathe a little slower, leave your subscription here. It is my quiet way of knowing you have come back. This is a work of fiction set in Regency England. Characters, names, and situations are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to real persons or events is mere coincidence. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its creases with the tranquil efficiency of a woman who had, in another life, closed an account. It was from the attorney of the Duke of Merrowfield. It concerned a clause. The clause was not new. It had been written into her father's will 7 years earlier at his Grace's suggestion, and neither man had judged it necessary to mention to her. It provided that the Rayford jointure, the 1,200 a year upon which her mother lived, reverted to the ducal estate upon the elder Lady Harcourt's death, unless Selina were by that hour a wife. Her mother had been coughing since Michaelmas. Selina set the letter down beside the sugar dish. She looked at the sugar dish for a while. It was the kind of silence that did not ask for company. The sugar dish was a small blue thing her mother had brought from Bath in the year of her marriage, and Selina had grown up seeing it every morning of her life without seeing it at all. It occurred to her now that the sugar dish would either stay in this house, or go to Sussex, or go to a cousin's roof in Portsmouth, and that, in the arithmetic of the letter beside it, there was no fourth option. She permitted herself to notice this, and then she stopped noticing it, and then she rang for Mrs. Bellamy and asked, in the voice of a woman ordering fish, whether the physician had said at what hour he meant to call. Dr. Ashwell called at 11. He had white hair and the careful hands of a man who had, over 30 years, opened a great many chests without hurrying any of them. He spent 20 minutes in the room upstairs and came down with the expression of someone who had done the arithmetic in his head and did not like the result. In the small parlour he took the cup she offered him. He did not drink from it. "How long?" Selina said. "A winter more," Dr. Ashwell said. "Perhaps 2. Not here. Not here. Not in this house," he said. "London in November will finish it. Sea air, if she can bear the journey. Or somewhere higher and drier, not this. Sussex is not higher and drier. Sussex is not this." He drank from the cup at last, in a single practical swallow, as if he had merely been waiting for the sentence to be handed over. He put on his hat. He said on the doorstep, in the voice of a man who had known the family since her father was alive, "There is no medicine for what she has, Miss Harcourt. There is only a place and a person or two willing to keep the fires up." Selina closed the door behind him. She stood in the hall for a moment, with the door still against her back. Above her, in the second landing, the small cough sounded twice, and then subsided, as if her mother had heard the doctor leave and was granting her, out of a lifetime of English good manners, the courtesy of a small pause in which to think. She thought. She went that afternoon to Lincoln's Inn. Mr. Osgood had been her father's attorney and now was, by an unremarkable inheritance of practice, hers. His office was up 2 flights of narrow stairs, and it smelled of tallow and old paper and a kind of tea Selina had never seen served anywhere else. He was a small man, 62, with sleeves worn shiny at the elbows and a habit of setting his pen down flat before he answered any question that mattered. She had brought the letter. She laid it upon his blotter without a word. He read it once, without hurry. He put his pen down flat. "Miss Harcourt," he said, "your father's will contains, if I recall it correctly, a clause of reversion. Was this clause explained to you at the reading?" "It was not." "Was it explained to your mother?" "It was read aloud in Latin and English by a clerk from the ducal solicitor's office. My mother was in her widow's black. She did not ask questions. His Grace was present." "His Grace was present." Mr. Osgood folded his own small hands over the letter. He looked, for a moment, out the narrow window at a brick wall that had been the view from his window for 40 years. "There are 3 facts, Miss Harcourt," he said. "The first is that a clause of reversion, procured by a party who profits by the reversion, from a testator who is elderly and enfeebled, in the absence of independent counsel, and in the absence of any explanation to the beneficiary, may be voidable upon proof of undue influence. The second is that your mother's physician, Dr. Ashwell, I take it, will testify to her state both then and now without embarrassment. The third is that I have a nephew in the Admiralty. His name is Captain Julian Harcourt. He is a cousin of yours by 2 generations and a very great distance, and he has a small house in Portsmouth, which he opens once a year and closes once a year, and which he has, in a letter of the 15th, offered to open again for the summer." Selina looked at Mr. Osgood. "I did not write to Captain Harcourt," she said. "No?" said Mr. Osgood. "I did." She held his gaze for a moment. On the other side of the desk, his small hands did not move. "I should have consulted you," he said, "and I ask your pardon for the presumption. I have known your family long enough that the arithmetic of the letter was clear to me from the day of your father's reading. I have simply been waiting for you to arrive at it." "Mr. Osgood," she said, and stopped. She began again. "Draft me a letter in the driest possible language. 3 facts. The clause is voidable. Dr. Ashwell will testify. My cousin in the Admiralty has already offered his roof." "To whom shall I direct it?" "To me. I will carry it." He drew a sheet of paper toward him and picked up the pen. Before he dipped it, he looked at her once without smiling. "You will carry it where, Miss Harcourt?" "On Thursday," she said, "to the yellow drawing-room in Grosvenor Square." The pen went into the ink. She went to see the Duke of Merrowfield on Thursday. She wore a walking dress of a sober blue that had cost 13 shillings to have altered, and that she had chosen because it was neither pretty nor ugly. His Grace received her in the yellow drawing-room, standing by the fire in that attitude of pleasant abstraction she had once mistaken for kindness. He was 41, twice a widower, celebrated for the mildness of his voice, and he had the particular English gift of being able to look at a woman without seeming to look at her. He did not speak of the clause. He spoke of hyacinths. He spoke of hyacinths for the better part of 8 minutes. He spoke of a variety his mother had grown at the Dower House at Rayford, and of a bulb merchant in Harlem, and of the peculiar difficulty of keeping the colour true through the 3rd generation. On the other side of the room, Selina let him finish. She sat with her gloved hands in her lap and her ankles crossed exactly as she had been taught at 14 by a French governess who had said dryly that the position was a small dam against interruption. She had never forgotten it. When he had finished, he inclined his head, as a man inclines his head who has done the courteous thing. "You did not come," he said, "to speak of flowers." "I did not, Your Grace." "Miss Harcourt," said the Duke, "you may say what you have come to say." She opened her reticule and took out the letter Mr. Osgood had drafted the previous morning. She laid it on the small table at his elbow, without turning it toward him, without straightening it, without any small gesture of presentation. It sat there as if it had been left by a servant. "I have been reading, Your Grace," she said. He did not look at the letter. He looked at her. His face did not change. It was not the kind of face that changed in company. It was the kind of face that changed only in the corridor afterward, and only when the doors had been shut. But the small muscle at the jaw acknowledged, without any furniture being disturbed, that the room had entirely rearranged itself. "You have been busy, Miss Harcourt." "I have been reading." He reached at last for the bell rope. He did not ring it. He touched it as a man touches an object that reassures him it is still there, and then he let his hand fall. "May I read it?" he said. "That is why it is on the table." He read it. He read it once, and then he read it a second time, more slowly, with the expression of a man who was translating from a language he had learned late in life. She watched him without watching him. On the mantel above his shoulder, there was a clock that had been in the room for at least 30 years, and it made a small, bright noise every second that she counted without meaning to. Between the 14th second and the 15th, he set the letter down. "Undue influence," he said. "Dr. Ashwell will testify." "He will. He will. And your cousin has a small house in Portsmouth," said Selina, "which he opens once a year and closes once a year, and which he has offered to open again." The Duke stood for a moment with his hand still on the letter. She could not see his hand from where she sat. The letter was on his side of the small table. He said, without looking up, "May I ask, Miss Harcourt, whether this offer was made at your request?" "It was made at Mr. Osgood's request, whom Mr. Osgood consulted before writing." "His own conscience," said Selina, "and the arithmetic of a document he has kept in his safe for 7 years. The Duke was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of silence that did not ask for company. Then he did an odd thing. He moved his hand off the letter as if he had realized that touching it further would be a discourtesy. He said, in the same mild voice he used for hyacinths, "You have not asked me for anything, Miss Harcourt." "I have not." "You have not asked me to withdraw the clause." "I have not." "You have not asked me for a settlement." "No." "You have not asked me to marry you." She looked at him for a moment across the small table. Outside, on the other side of the tall drawing-room window, the March light did what March light always did. It went a little sideways, as if it had somewhere else to be. She said, in a voice that was steadier than it needed to be, "I understood, Your Grace, that you had already decided that question." He looked at her. It was not frustration on his face. It was not calculation. It was something that was, perhaps, the beginning of a reassessment. She rose. She drew on her gloves, finger by finger, in the order she had been taught, and she did not rush any of them. On the small table the letter stayed where she had put it. She did not take it back. "I will not stay for tea," she said. "Miss Harcourt, I have a call at 3. He did not press her. He walked her to the door of the yellow drawing-room with the mild, composed courtesy that was of the many things Selina had once mistaken for kindness, the last one still standing. At the door he stopped. He said, and here at last his voice altered without altering pitch, in the way that a note held too long on a pianoforte alters without altering pitch, "Your mother is not to be moved before June." "I did not ask you when she was to be moved." "I am telling you," he said, "when she is not to be moved. She looked at him for the space of 2 seconds. She inclined her head 1 degree. She did not thank him. She did not need to thank him. She went out into the hall. On the drive home, in the hired carriage, she had not asked her mother for their own. She folded her gloves into her lap with the tranquil efficiency of a woman who had at last opened one. She had not, however, opened all of them. There were, in the letter she had left on the small table in the yellow drawing room, only 3 facts. There were, in the sequence of events that had put those 3 facts on that small table, at least 7, and there was, in the drawer of her writing desk at Bruton Street, an 8th fact that Mr. Osgood did not yet know she had, because she had not, at 3 in the morning, been ready to tell him. The 8th fact was a letter of her father's. It was undated. It was in his hand, on paper that had gone the color of very weak tea. It said, in 3 lines, "I have signed today what Merrowfield asked." I did not read the 3rd page. If ever it should touch her, take this to Osgood, my thanks for it. And then, in smaller writing at the bottom, as if it had been added at a different hour, God forgive me the ease with which I trusted him. Selina had found the letter 3 months after her father's death. She had put it in the drawer and she had not touched it since. She had told herself that she was keeping it because it was in his hand. She had told herself many things. That night in the small parlour, she took it out. She read it once. She put it back. She did not, that night, take it to Mr. Osgood. She was not sure why. It was the kind of silence that did not yet ask for company. The next morning, a card came from His Grace. It was engraved on very good paper, and it said only that the Duke of Merrowfield begged the courtesy of calling upon Miss Harcourt and her mother at whatever hour was convenient on Saturday. There was no note. There was no flower. There was no reference to any letter. There was only the card. Selina looked at the card for some time. Then she wrote, in her own hand, in the driest possible language, that Miss Harcourt and Lady Harcourt would receive His Grace at 4. She sent it by the boy. Then she went upstairs to her mother's room, and without saying anything of the card, spent an hour reading aloud from a novel her mother had bought in the year of her marriage, and had never finished. Her mother was, at that hour, well enough to sit up in bed. She was, in her small way, the woman Selina had spent her childhood trying to imitate, quiet on the outside and ordered on the inside, with a laugh that had never in her life been produced on cue. She listened to the novel with her eyes half closed and her hand on the counterpane. When Selina had finished the chapter, she opened her eyes. "Merrowfield," she said. Selina looked up. "He is coming Saturday," her mother said. "You wrote back before you came up. You heard the boy." "I hear a great many things, my love, that I no longer need to speak of." Selina put the novel down on the counterpane and folded her hands over it. Her mother watched her with the expression of a woman who had learned, over 60 years, to read her daughter's silences the way another woman reads print. "Selina," said Lady Harcourt, "I do not wish to be moved to Sussex in October." "I know it, Mamma. I do not wish to be moved to Sussex ever." "I know it." "And I do not wish," said Lady Harcourt, and here her voice went at last a little thin, "to be the reason you become the wife of a man who did not think me worth mentioning to." Selina looked at her mother for a long moment. On the other side of the tall bedroom window, the March light did what March light always did in the sick room. It went 1 degree softer, as if it were being tactful. She said, in the voice of a woman ordering fish, "Then you will not be that reason, Mamma. You are quite certain of that?" "I am." "You have your father's chin," said her mother, and she closed her eyes. They did not speak again of the Duke that morning. Saturday came in the way that Saturdays came in Bruton Street, with a smell of coal smoke on the wet flagstones and a paper boy shouting at the corner of the Mews. His Grace arrived at 4 exactly. He was shown into the small drawing room downstairs, because Lady Harcourt was not well enough to receive him upstairs. He stood by the fire in that attitude of pleasant abstraction which Selina had, in the interval, ceased to mistake for anything. He did not speak of the clause. He did not speak of the letter. He did not speak of hyacinths. He spoke, and this was a thing he had never done in her hearing before, of her father. He spoke of a walk her father had taken with him at Rayford in the summer of the year 11, from the South Terrace as far as the lower pond. He spoke of the way her father had on that walk spoken of the 1,200 a year and of what he wished it to do, and of the way he had at one point turned and said, with the small self-mocking laugh of a man who did not think himself clever, that he was signing what he did not fully understand, and that he was trusting Merrowfield to explain it to Selina when the time came. He said this, and then he said, without any change in his voice, "I did not explain it to you." Selina sat very still. "I intended," he said, "to explain it to you at Rayford in the autumn of the year 12. My first wife died in September of that year. I did not explain it to you." "No." "I intended," he said, "to explain it to you at Rayford in the summer of the year 13. My second wife died in June of that year. I did not explain it to you." "No." "And I intended," he said, and here he looked at last at the fire, "to explain it to you at Rayford in the autumn of the year 14. I did not explain it to you. I do not know, Miss Harcourt, why." She looked at him across the small drawing room. Between them, on the low table, was the tea her mother had ordered up an hour before it was drinkable, and the small blue sugar dish from Bath. Selina did not offer him the tea. She did not touch the sugar dish. "Your Grace," she said, "there is not a clause in the world that has kept itself unexplained for 7 years by the accident of 2 funerals." He did not answer. He looked still at the fire. He said after a while in the mild voice he kept for the corridors of Almack's, "You would not have accepted an explanation in the year 12, Miss Harcourt. You were 16, and you would have said yes." She thought about this. She thought about the girl of 16 she had been in the year of her father's death, with her hair not yet properly pinned, and her father not yet a year in the ground. She thought about the yes she would have said, and about the woman who would have said it, and about the 7 winters in the sick room that would have followed. "That," she said, "was not for you to decide for me." "No, it was not for you to decide for me at 17. No, or at 18, or at 19, or at 20, or at any of the years since. No. You allowed my father to sign what he did not understand," said Selina, "and you allowed me to grow up under a clause I was not permitted to read, and you have now come on a Saturday to tell me that the 7 years of your silence were a kindness." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice she had not heard him use before, and which she was not sure she would hear again, "I have not come to tell you that, Miss Harcourt. I have come to tell you that I know it was not one." She looked at him for a long moment. It was not the answer she had expected. It was not, in fact, an answer she had prepared any answer to. On the other side of the small drawing room, the clock did what all clocks did in that house at that hour. It made a small, bright noise every second, and it did not itself offer any opinion. "Your Grace," she said at last, "my mother is upstairs. She is not well enough to receive you. She sends her regards. She asks that you convey to His Grace her thanks for the courtesy of the visit and for the courtesy of not sending flowers." He inclined his head 1 degree. "She is a woman," said the Duke, "of formidable good taste." "She is." He rose. He did not, at the door, say anything further about the letter. He did not say anything further about the clause. He said, in the mild voice she had, at last, learned to hear as something other than kindness, "May I call again on Wednesday? "You may call, your grace. I do not undertake to be at home." "That is entirely fair, Miss Harcourt." He went. She stood in the small drawing room for some time after he had gone. Then she took the small blue sugar dish from Bath, and she carried it upstairs to her mother, and she set it on the tray beside the bed, and she did not, that day, tell her mother anything of what had been said. The card came again on Monday. It was, this time, not from His Grace. It was from His Grace's aunt. The Dowager Lady Compton was 71 years of age, and possessed of the particular gift of arriving at any drawing room in London a full quarter hour before she had been expected. She arrived at Bruton Street on Tuesday afternoon in a bonnet the colour of pewter and a walking stick with a silver head, and she declined tea, and she said without preamble, in the voice of a woman who had been managing men of her family for 53 years, "Miss Harcourt, my nephew is behaving like a fool." "Lady Compton." "He is a good boy," said Lady Compton, though her good boy was 41, "and he has been a fool 3 times, and I have permitted him each of them, and I do not propose to permit him a 4th. Lady Compton, I do not know that I have read the clause." Selina looked at her. "I have read the clause," said Lady Compton, "because I have kept a copy of my brother's will in my writing desk since the year 8. My brother did not think it necessary to mention it to me either. There is a great deal that the men of my family do not think it necessary to mention. I have made it at 71 a small hobby of my old age to mention things back to them." Selina, in spite of herself, felt the corner of her mouth do something that was the contention of a smile. "I have not come," said Lady Compton, "to ask you to marry my nephew. I have come to ask you not to do it out of arithmetic. You may do it out of a great many things. You may do it out of stubbornness, or out of fatigue, or out of a genuine liking for hyacinths. You may not do it because the 1,200 a year is otherwise going into a pocket that does not need it. Have I made myself clear?" "You have, Lady Compton." "Excellent. Now, my dear, tell me about your mother." They talked for the better part of an hour about Lady Harcourt. They talked about the summer of the year 78, in which she had first come out, and about a country house in Wiltshire that had once had a very fine rose garden, and about a curate who had, in the year 83, written her a proposal in Latin. Lady Compton drank 3 cups of tea on the grounds that she had declined the first, and she left at 5:30 with the expression of a woman who had accomplished what she had come to accomplish and did not intend to explain any of it. At the door, she said without turning around, "There will be a small evening at my house on Friday. Nothing dreadful. 20 people. My nephew will be there. So will Lady Serena Price. You will be there also, my dear, if only to give me the pleasure of pretending to be surprised." She went. Selina stood in the hall. Lady Serena Price. The name entered the hall as if it had been introduced by a footman. Lady Serena Price was, in the arithmetic of the London season, the thing that ate other arithmetic. She was 28, twice engaged and never married, possessed of a fortune of 18,000 a year, and of a laugh that was known to be produced on cue. She had, in the winter of the year 14, been much seen with the Duke of Merrowfield at the exhibition at Somerset House. It had been said in more than one drawing-room that the mildness of his Grace's voice was matched at last by the calculation of Lady Serena's smile, and that between them they would keep the arrangement of the Merrowfield estates in the same hands it had been in for 100 years. Selina had known this in the way one knew things one had not asked to know. She had not, until Lady Compton's card, been required to know it in the way one knew a thing one was about to be seated across a room from. She wrote a note that evening to Lady Compton, in the driest possible language it accepted for Friday. She did not consult her mother. She did not consult Mr. Osgood. She did not consult that night even the drawer of her writing desk. She went on Friday in a gown of dove-grey silk that had been her mother's in the year of the peace, altered by a small woman in Bond Street who understood that Selina did not wish to look either pretty or ugly. She wore no jewels but her mother's small pearls. She wore her hair in the plainest possible arrangement. She looked, when she caught her own reflection in the pier glass at the top of Lady Compton's stairs, like a woman who had come to the party on the arm of no one, which was true. Lady Compton's drawing room was large without being immoderate. It was lit with wax candles and one lamp, and it held about it that particular smell of old paper, hothouse flowers, and slightly cooler air by the window which had, since Selina's childhood, meant the beginning of an evening she would remember. The Duke of Merrowfield was there. He stood by the far mantelpiece in his particular attitude of pleasant abstraction. He inclined his head to Selina at exactly the right moment and to exactly the right degree. He did not cross the room. He was speaking with a small elderly gentleman about the Corn Laws, and Selina had, in her lifetime, seen a great many men use the Corn Laws to postpone crossing rooms. Lady Serena Price was also there. She was in white, because Lady Serena was always in white when the room was likely to contain a duke, and she wore a small diamond at her throat which had belonged, it was said, to a queen. She was speaking with Lady Compton by the pianoforte. She looked at the right moments at the Duke of Merrowfield. She did not look at any moment at Selina. Selina crossed the room to Lady Compton and paid her respects. Lady Compton took her hand and pressed it once. She said, without dropping her voice, "Miss Harcourt, you know Lady Serena Price." "I have not had the pleasure." Lady Serena turned. She looked at Selina with the expression of a woman who had, in the last 4 days, been informed of a small piece of arithmetic she had not been expecting. "Miss Harcourt," she said in a voice that was perfectly composed, "I have heard your name a great deal this week." "I am sorry to hear it, Lady Serena." "Are you?" "I have heard yours also," said Selina, "and I have not thought less of you for it." Lady Serena looked at her for the space of 2 seconds. Then, in one of those small movements that were the whole art of Lady Serena's face, the muscle at the corner of her mouth altered by half a degree. It was not a smile, it was the contention of a smile. It was the same small movement Selina had made 10 days earlier in the office at Lincoln's Inn. "Lady Compton," said Lady Serena, "you have made your evening interesting." "I did not," said Lady Compton, "have to work hard at it." The evening progressed. There was music. A young cousin of Lady Compton's played a piece by an Italian gentleman that had been fashionable in the year 12. There was a small supper. There was the particular kind of conversation that is possible in rooms of 20 people, in which no one is heard by more than 4 other persons at once, and in which a woman may, if she wishes, sit for 10 minutes by a window and think. Selina sat for 10 minutes by a window. The Duke of Merrowfield crossed the room, at last, at 10:30. He did not sit down. He stood on the other side of the small window seat, with his hands behind him. He said in the mild voice he used for hyacinths and corn laws, "You are keeping your own counsel this evening, Miss Harcourt." "I'm keeping my mother's." "How is she?" "She is well enough that I could leave her. She is not well enough that I could stay long." "You will not stay to dance." "I do not intend to." He was quiet for a moment. "I have been asked by my aunt," he said, "to solicit your hand for the next set. I did not tell her that I intended to. I am telling you now that I do." She looked at him. She said, in the voice of a woman ordering fish, "Your Grace, I am not certain what you propose to accomplish by dancing with me." "I propose to accomplish nothing, Miss Harcourt." "Then it is a peculiar use of a dance." "It is." He offered his arm. She looked at his arm for a moment. It was not in itself a remarkable arm. It was the arm of a man of 41, in a coat of very good cut, held out at the correct angle. There was, above the arm, the small muscle at his jaw, which she had at last learned to read. It was doing the thing it had done in the yellow drawing-room, when she had put the letter on the table. She rose. She put her hand on his arm. They danced. They danced the first set of the second half of the evening, and Lady Compton's 20 guests noticed it, and Lady Serena Price noticed it. And a small gentleman by the pianoforte who wrote a column in a paper Selina did not read noticed it also. The Duke did not speak during the dance. He led her through the figures without any flourish and without any hesitation, and at the end of the set he returned her to her chair with the mild, composed courtesy that was, of the many things Selina had once mistaken for kindness, the last one still standing. He did not ask her for the next set. He asked 20 minutes later Lady Serena Price for the next set. It was, Selina realized on the drive home, the exact arithmetic he had been sent to accomplish. He had danced with her because his aunt had asked him to. He had danced with Lady Serena because the room by then required it. He had done both with the same face. She sat in the hired carriage and watched the March streets go past, and she permitted herself, for the space of 2 blocks, to be briefly very tired. Then she stopped permitting it. At Bruton Street, in the drawer of her writing desk, was the 8th fact. She had not yet taken it to Mr. Osgood. She had told herself many things about why she had not. She was, at last, ready to tell herself the truth. She had not taken it to Mr. Osgood because she had been, in some small part of herself, waiting to see whether his Grace would, without being made to, offer her the answer she was owed. He had not. She sat down at the writing desk at midnight. She wrote to Mr. Osgood in the driest possible language. She said that she wished to add a 4th fact to the letter of the 9th. She said that the 4th fact was a letter of her father's, undated, in his hand, and that she would bring it to his office at 10 the following morning. She sealed the note. She put it on the hall table for the boy. She did not sleep well. In the small hours, she got up and stood by the tall window of her bedroom and watched the London rain making, on the flagstones of Bruton Street, the small, bright noises that London rain always made in March. She thought about the girl of 16 she had been. She thought about the woman of 23 she now was. She thought about the 7 winters between them. She did not, at any point in the small hours, think about hyacinths. At 10 in the morning, she was in Mr. Osgood's office at Lincoln's Inn. She put the 8th fact on his blotter without a word. He read it once without hurry. He put his pen down flat. "Miss Harcourt," he said, "this is your father's hand." "It is. You have had it in your possession since 3 months after his death." "Ah." Mr. Osgood was quiet for a moment. He looked out the narrow window at the brick wall that had been the view from his window for 40 years. He said, in the mild voice he kept for the corridor, "This letter is not evidence in itself of undue influence. It is, however, corroborative. Presented with Dr. Ashwell's testimony and with the arithmetic of the clause, it would, in my judgment, be sufficient." "Sufficient for what, Mr. Osgood?" "Sufficient for a private application to His Grace's solicitors," said Mr. Osgood, "for the voluntary vacation of the clause, which is, Miss Harcourt, a great deal less troublesome than a public application to the Court of Chancery, and which is, if I may say so, what I would recommend." "Draft it," she said. "You do not wish to sleep on it." "I have slept on it, Mr. Osgood, for 4 months." He drew a sheet of paper toward him and picked up the pen. He did not, this time, look at her before he dipped it. He wrote for the better part of 40 minutes. He wrote without haste, in the small, careful hand of a man who had never in his life put a comma out of place. When he had finished, he read the draft aloud to her. She listened. She made 2 small corrections. He copied it fair. He put his seal to it. He put it in an envelope. He addressed the envelope in his own hand to the solicitor of the Duke of Merrowfield at the address in the Temple. "I shall send it by hand this afternoon," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Osgood." "Miss Harcourt." She turned at the door. "Yes, there is a thing," said Mr. Osgood, "that I have not said to you. I did not say it in the year of your father's death because you were 16. I have not said it in the 7 years since because you did not, until now, ask me. I will say it now." She waited. "Your father did not know what he was signing," said Mr. Osgood. "He knew on that afternoon in Rayford that he was signing a clause of reversion. He did not know that the clause required your marriage. He believed, on the assurances of his grace, that the clause reverted only on your mother's death, in the absence of any surviving Harcourt to receive the jointure. He believed that you, being alive, would automatically be that Harcourt. His grace let him believe this. That is what the letter in the drawer of your writing desk says. It is what I have believed for 7 years that it says. And it is why I have kept a copy of your father's will in my safe." Selina stood in the doorway of Mr. Osgood's office for some time. On the other side of the narrow window, the March light did what March light always did in Lincoln's Inn. It went a little sideways, as if it had somewhere else to be. "Mr. Osgood," she said at last, "I am grateful." "You are not," said Mr. Osgood in the mild voice of a small man of 62. "To be grateful, Miss Harcourt. You are to be, if I may say so, careful of your temper. His Grace is going to receive that letter this afternoon. He is going to decide, in the corridor of his own house, in the hour that follows, what kind of man he intends for the remainder of his life to be. You are not going to be there. You are not going to help him. You are going to go home. You are going to sit with your mother. You are going to wait." She went home. She sat with her mother. She waited. There was a small silence in Bruton Street that lasted the better part of 2 days. There was no card. There was no note. The paper carried, on Sunday morning, a small paragraph about a fine sermon at St. James's, Piccadilly, and Selina read it twice without registering a word. On Sunday evening at 7, a note came from Grosvenor Square. It was in the Duke's hand, on paper without a crest. It said in 3 lines, "The clause has been vacated this afternoon. The papers are with your Mr. Osgood. I ask only, Miss Harcourt, that I may call upon you Monday." Selina read the note twice. She folded it along its creases. She did not that evening answer it. She put it on the small table by the fire in the small drawing-room, and she left it there, and she went upstairs to her mother, and she read aloud from the same novel her mother had bought in the year of her marriage and had never finished. Her mother, that evening, was well enough to laugh once at a scene about a curate. She laughed the laugh that Selina had spent her childhood trying to imitate, quiet, dry, unproduced. When she had finished laughing, she put her hand over Selina's on the counterpane. "The clause," she said. "It is gone. The 1200 is yours, Mamma. It will be yours until you do not need it, and then it will be mine, and then it will be no one's, and by then it will not signify." "Is there," said Lady Harcourt, and here her voice went thin again, "still a Merrowfield in the house?" "There is a note from a Merrowfield on the small table by the fire in the drawing-room, and you have not answered it." "I have not." Lady Harcourt was quiet for a moment. She said at last, in the same voice she had used 60 years earlier, to a curate in Wiltshire who had written her a proposal in Latin, "Selina." "Mamma." "He is going," said Lady Harcourt, "to be a great deal easier to refuse now than he was a week ago. I do not think it is my business to tell you whether to refuse him. I do think it is my business to tell you, my love, that if you do refuse him, you must refuse him because you do not want him, not because he did not deserve you last week. Do you understand the difference?" "I do, Mamma." "Very well. Read me the next chapter." Selina read her the next chapter. Her mother, halfway through it, went to sleep. Downstairs, in the small drawing-room on the small table by the fire, the note from Grosvenor Square lay unmoved. Selina looked at it for a long time. Then she went to the writing desk. She wrote 3 lines. She wrote them in the driest possible language. She said, "You may call at 3. I do not undertake to receive you upstairs. I do undertake to be at home." She sent the note by the boy on Monday morning. He called at 3. He was shown into the small drawing room. He did not stand by the fire. He stood by the tall window that looked out onto Bruton Street. He looked, when Selina came in, as a man looks who has spent 2 nights that he did not need to spend at 3 in the morning. She sat. She did not offer him tea. She did not offer him the small blue sugar dish from Bath. "Your Grace," she said, "I have received your note. I have received also this morning from Mr. Osgood the papers vacating the clause. I have not thanked you for either. I do not intend to. No, Miss Harcourt. You have done, at last, what you should have done in the year 12. You have done it because I made you do it. It is not a thing for which you may expect thanks." "I did not come," he said, and here he turned from the window, "for thanks, Miss Harcourt." "Then, Your Grace, why have you come?" He looked at her across the small drawing room. He said, in a voice that was neither the mild voice for hyacinths nor the mild voice for corn laws, "I have come to ask whether there is a version of the last 7 years in which I might have earned the right to sit down in this room." She looked at him for the space of 2 seconds. "There is not," she said. "No, there is not, Your Grace, a version of the last 7 years in which any man might have earned that right. You allowed a girl of 16 to grow up under a clause she was not permitted to read. There is not, in any drawing room in England, a version of that in which the girl is grateful for the arithmetic that made her, on the 4th of March in the year 15, no longer a girl. Do you understand this?" "I understand it." "Then, Your Grace, please stand there by the window a little longer and let me finish." He stood there by the window. "There is not," she said, "a version of the last 7 years in which I may accept your hand as a settlement of the last 7 years. I will not permit the last 7 years to be settled. They are mine. They are not yours to settle. Do you understand this also?" "I do." "Very well." She was quiet for a moment. On the other side of the tall window in the small drawing room, the March light did what March light always did in the afternoon. It went 1 degree softer, as if it were being tactful. She said, in a voice that was steadier than it needed to be, "There is, however, Your Grace, a thing I do not know." "Yes, I do not know," said Selina, "whether there is, in the man who has been standing at the window for the last 10 minutes, a version of him that is not the man who allowed my father to sign what he did not understand. I do not know it, because I have not been given occasion to know it. I do not know it because you have not, in the 7 years since my father's death, given me any occasion at all." "No, you will not," she said. "Give me that occasion this afternoon. You will not give it to me next month. You will not give it to me, if you give it to me at all, in less than a year." He was quiet for a moment. He said, at last, in a voice she had not heard him use before, and which she was at last willing to hear him use, "I do not, Miss Harcourt, deserve a year." "No, Your Grace." "May I ask for one?" "You may. I do not undertake to give it to you. I do undertake, if you ask for it in the driest possible language and without hyacinths, to consider it." He inclined his head. It was not the inclination he had used at Lady Compton's, of exactly the right degree, at exactly the right moment. It was, by a very small margin, deeper. He did not sit down. He did not, at any point in that afternoon, ask her a further question. He stood by the window for another quarter of an hour, and he spoke, without any pretense of ease, about the state of the North Field at Rayford, and about a schoolmaster in the village whose salary had not been raised since the year 6, and about the small matter of the roof of the church. He spoke to her as one speaks to a woman one has decided at last to explain a great many things to. She listened. She made 2 observations, both practical. He wrote them down in a small notebook he took from his coat, which she had not, in 8 years of knowing him, ever seen him take from his coat. At 4:30 he rose. "May I call again on Wednesday, Miss Harcourt?" "You may call. I do not undertake to be at home. Do not send flowers." "No, Miss Harcourt." He went. She stood for some time by the small table on which sat still his note of Sunday evening. She did not that day put it in the fire. She did not that day put it in a drawer. She left it where it was. The rest of the season went by in the way that seasons went by in Bruton Street, when a woman of 23 had made up her mind not to be, for the moment, either married or unmarried, but simply a daughter with a mother. Dr. Ashwell called on Tuesdays. The Dowager Lady Compton called on the third Thursday of each month, and once brought her small elderly cousin, and once brought a book of French poems, and once brought a young clergyman she had, she said, been keeping her eye on for one or the other of her nieces. Lady Serena Price was, in the middle of April, engaged to a marquis with a house in Yorkshire, which was, Lady Compton observed, exactly what Lady Serena Price had always deserved, and Selina, hearing it, felt nothing at all, which was a thing she had not expected to feel. The Duke of Merrowfield called on Wednesdays. He was not always received. When he was received, he did not sit down. He stood by the window, or by the fire, or once by the small table on which sat the small blue sugar dish from Bath, at which he looked for a moment as if he were adding a small entry in the small notebook of his mind. He never spoke of the clause. He never spoke of the letter. He never, in that quarter of the year 15, spoke of marriage. He spoke of a great many other things. He spoke of the schoolmaster at Rayford, whose salary had been raised at last by £7 a year. He spoke of the roof of the church at Rayford, which was to be repaired in June. He spoke of a young curate at Portsmouth, whom Captain Julian Harcourt had recommended, and of the small house in Portsmouth, which had been opened for the summer, as Captain Harcourt had promised. He spoke once, in a voice that was neither the mild voice for hyacinths nor the mild voice for corn laws, of his first wife, who had died in September of the year 12, of a fever that Dr. Ashwell would, if asked, have prevented. He said this once. He did not say it a second time. He asked once whether he might be permitted to send a message to Dr. Ashwell about Lady Harcourt. "You may," said Selina, "provided that you send it in the driest possible language, and that you do not offer to pay him." "Miss Harcourt, he has been paid, Your Grace, for 30 years, by my father and by my mother, and he will not be paid now by you. If he is to be paid by anyone else, he will be paid by me, out of the 1,200 which is at last my mother's, and which will be, in time, mine." He inclined his head. He sent the message. Dr. Ashwell replied. Dr. Ashwell called on the following Tuesday. He spent this time 25 minutes in the room upstairs, and he came down with the expression of a man who had done the arithmetic in his head and had not liked it any better, but had this time revised one small figure by a very small margin. "A winter more," he said. "Not 2. Not here. Not in this house, not in Sussex. Somewhere higher and drier, the south of France, if the war permits it, or the coast at Dawlish. I will take her to Dawlish. Miss Harcourt, may I say—" "You may not, Dr. Ashwell. Thank you for coming." She took her mother to Dawlish in the last week of May. She took her by short stages, in a carriage, with a maid, and with Mrs. Bellamy, and with the small blue sugar dish from Bath wrapped in a piece of flannel. She took a small house near the sea, of 6 rooms, whose rent she had negotiated in her own hand, and whose kitchen faced the east, because her mother had always preferred to see the morning before it was quite the morning. She stayed there with her mother for the whole of the summer, and she read aloud a great many novels, and she took, in the early mornings, long walks along the shingle with a small dog that had, without any warning, attached itself to the household in the second week. She did not, at Dawlish, hear from his Grace at all. She had not asked him to write. He had not written. It was, she thought on the whole, a great deal more like courtesy than any of the other things she had, in the 8 years of knowing him, mistaken for it. Her mother died at Dawlish on the 10th of September, in the small blue room upstairs, with the east light coming in through the muslin curtains and with the small dog asleep on the counterpane. She died, as she had done a great many things in her life. without any fuss. She had, in the small hours of the morning, opened her eyes once, and had looked at Selina for a moment, and had said in the voice of a woman ordering fish that Selina had her father's chin, and had closed her eyes again. Selina buried her mother at Dawlish, in the small churchyard whose bell rang at 10 and at 4. She did not send for anyone. She wrote 3 letters. She wrote to Mr. Osgood. She wrote to Captain Julian Harcourt at Portsmouth. She wrote in the driest possible language to the Dowager Lady Compton at Grosvenor Square. She did not write to His Grace. The Dowager Lady Compton wrote back on the 14th. Her letter was 1 page long. It said, in the middle of it, in a very firm hand, "You will come to me at Grosvenor Square when you come up to town. You will not go to an hotel. You will not go to Bruton Street. You will come to me. Do you understand this, Miss Harcourt?" Selina understood it. She came up to town in the last week of September. She went in a hired carriage from the coaching inn at Charing Cross to Grosvenor Square. She stayed with the Dowager Lady Compton for 3 weeks. She did not, in those 3 weeks, go to Bruton Street. She did not, in those 3 weeks, see His Grace. He did not, in those 3 weeks, present himself in Grosvenor Square. He did not send a card. He did not send flowers. He sent, by a footman, on the 2nd of October, a single small parcel. It contained a book. The book was a novel her mother had bought in the year of her marriage and had never finished. It had been, at the last time Selina had seen it, on the small table by the bed at Bruton Street. It was, in the parcel, wrapped in a piece of flannel that had once belonged, Selina was fairly certain, to the small blue sugar dish from Bath. There was, with the parcel, no card. There was, with the parcel, no note. There was, tucked into page 312, a small pressed hyacinth. Selina looked at the hyacinth for some time. Then she closed the book. She did not, that day, take the hyacinth out. She did not, that day, tell the Dowager Lady Compton about the parcel. The Dowager Lady Compton, however, was 71 years of age and possessed of the particular gift of noticing things that had been sent to her house without going through her hall. She said at dinner that evening, in the voice of a woman managing a nephew of 41, "Miss Harcourt, my nephew has, I believe, sent you a small book." "He has, Lady Compton." "He has done it," said Lady Compton, "without a card." "Without a card." "He is," said Lady Compton, "learning, Miss Harcourt." Selina looked at Lady Compton across the small dining table. She said, in a voice that had, over the summer, learned to be a little drier than her mother's, "He is learning, Lady Compton, that a card is not the same thing as a hyacinth." "Ah," said Lady Compton, and she raised her glass in a small, dry salute. They did not speak that evening of His Grace again. Selina left Grosvenor Square in the 3rd week of October. She did not go to Bruton Street. She did not, as yet, know what she meant to do with Bruton Street. She went instead, in the small carriage that Captain Julian Harcourt had sent up from Portsmouth, to the small house in Portsmouth that Mr. Osgood had at last obtained for her use in her own name out of a fund of her mother's, which had been, all along, in her mother's name, and had never been in the arithmetic of the clause at all. She stayed at Portsmouth for the whole of the winter. She read a great deal. She walked in the mornings along the sea wall. She took at last into her own hands the accounts of Rayford Park, which had been, in the summer of the year 15, formally returned to her by His Grace's solicitor in an envelope with no card, with no note, with only the driest possible language. She read them a second time. She made, in her own hand, a great many small corrections. She did not, at Portsmouth, hear from His Grace at all. She had not asked him to write. He had not written. It was, she thought on the whole, a great deal more like patience than any of the other things she had, in the 8 years of knowing him, mistaken for it. She went to Rayford in the last week of February, in the year 16. She went alone, with a maid, and with Mrs. Bellamy, and with the small dog, and with the small blue sugar dish from Bath in a piece of flannel. She had not, since her father's death, spent a night at Rayford. She'd been asked more than once in the 7 years since whether she meant to. She had not, until the last week of February in the year 16, said yes. She said yes because the accounts of Rayford Park, which had been in her own hands for 4 months, told her that the roof of the north wing would not, without a small amount of intervention, last the summer. She said yes because the schoolmaster at Rayford had written her a letter, in a hand that trembled a little, in which he had thanked her for the increase in his salary which had been made in her name in the previous year, which had not in fact been made in her name at all. She said yes because the small dog in Portsmouth had begun to look at the door in the mornings, as a dog looks at a door when it has spent too long in a house of 6 rooms. She said yes also because there was a thing she had not, in 11 months of not saying, said to His Grace. She had, at last, decided that she wished to say it in the yellow drawing-room at Merrowfield, and not in a note sent by the boy. Rayford, in the last week of February, was a very quiet place. The house sat, as she had left it at 16, in the shallow bowl of the park, with the south terrace above the lower pond and the east front turning its shoulder to the wind. The lower pond was frozen. The rooks were in the elms. The snow had in the corners of the terrace gone the colour of old lace. The steward met her in the hall. He was the same steward her father had had. He was, by the calendar, 63, and he looked in the hall of Rayford as if he had been 63 for a great many years. "Miss Harcourt," he said, "Mr. Halfpenny." "His Grace has been here." She looked at Mr. Halfpenny. Mr. Halfpenny looked back at her with the expression of a man who had, over 63 years, learned that some pieces of information were, on the whole, better delivered in the hall than in the drawing-room. "When?" "He was here in December, miss. He was here in January. He was here also, if I may say so, in the last week of last week. He has been, if I may say so further, uncommonly attentive to the north wing. To the roof. To the roof. He has, if I may say so, engaged the men. He has paid, if I may say so, none of them. He has, if I may say so, sent me every account to be sent on to Mr. Osgood." "I have not seen those accounts." "No, miss. Mr. Osgood has held them. On instruction. His Grace's instruction." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds, miss, that he did not wish you to see them until you were, if I may say so, at Rayford. He did not wish, if I may say so, to send you a card." Selina looked at Mr. Halfpenny for a long moment. Mr. Halfpenny looked at that moment at the flagged floor of the hall of Rayford, which had been in his care since he had been 22. "Mr. Halfpenny," she said. "Miss, he is not now in the house." "He is not, miss. He is at Merrowfield. He is expecting, if I may say so, no one." "He will," said Selina, "expect someone tomorrow at 3. "Very good, miss." She went upstairs. She stood for some time at the tall window of the room she had had at 16, and she looked out at the frozen lower pond and at the rooks in the elms. She did not that evening take the pressed hyacinth out of page 312. She did not that evening unpack the small blue sugar dish. She permitted herself, for the space of 2 blocks, for the space that was of the 2 blocks between the elms and the terrace, to be, briefly, very tired. Then she stopped permitting it. At 3 in the afternoon on the following day, she was in the yellow drawing-room at Merrowfield. It was the same yellow drawing-room. It had the same clock on the mantel. It had the same small table on which, in March of the previous year, she had laid Mr. Osgood's letter. It had the same fireplace, in front of which His Grace was standing, in the same attitude of pleasant abstraction which she had, over the course of 11 months, ceased to notice. He turned. He did not this time speak of hyacinths. "Miss Harcourt, Your Grace, you are at Rayford." "I am. I arrived on Monday. I have seen Mr. Halfpenny." I have seen this morning the roof of the north wing." He was quiet for a moment. "I asked Mr. Halfpenny. He said not to send the accounts. He told me. I did not wish to send you a card. He told me that also." He looked at that moment at the small table on which the letter had lain. He did not touch it. He said in a voice she had not heard him use before, and which she was at last willing to hear him use, "The temperature in the conservatory at Rayford is 16 degrees. If you should wish to come tomorrow, it will still be 16 degrees. It will also be 16 degrees if you should wish to come in June." She looked at him for the space of 2 seconds. She did not smile. She did not at that moment permit herself the contention of a smile. She said, in the voice of a woman who had at last opened all of them, "Your Grace." "Yes, I do not know," she said, "whether I shall come tomorrow. I do know that I shall be at Rayford in June. I know it because the roof of the north wing will not, without a small amount of intervention, last the summer, and because the schoolmaster is owed a further increase in his salary, and because there is a small dog who is, at present, very tired of 6 rooms. Yes, I do not undertake, Your Grace, to come to the conservatory tomorrow. I do undertake, if you should wish to walk in the park in June, to consider it." He inclined his head. It was by a very small margin deeper than the inclination at Lady Compton's, and deeper again than the inclination at Bruton Street. He said, in the mild voice she had at last learned to hear as something other than kindness, "Miss Harcourt, Your Grace, you have not come this afternoon for tea. No, Your Grace, you have come to tell me a thing. I have. I am listening." She looked at him across the yellow drawing-room. On the other side of the tall drawing-room window, in the shallow bowl of the park at Marrowfield, the February light did what February light always did in the shallow bowls of English parks. It went a little sideways, as if it had somewhere else to be. "Your Grace," she said, "I have come to tell you that I do not thank you. I do not thank you for the vacation of the claws. I do not thank you for the roof of the north wing. I do not thank you for the pressed hyacinth in page 312. I have come to tell you that I have received all of them, and that I have not thanked you for any of them, and that I do not intend to. No, Miss Harcourt. I have come to tell you also," she said, "that I have not, in the last 11 months, thought less of you. I have not thought more of you. I have thought of you on the whole as a man who has, at last, begun the small and inconvenient work of becoming the version of himself I could not, in the year 12, have asked him to be. Yes, I do not," she said, "undertake, Your Grace, to marry you. I do not undertake to consider marrying you. I do undertake, if the roof of the north wing is finished by June, and if the schoolmaster has been paid, and if you should send no cards, and no flowers, and no hyacinths in the interval, to walk with you in June from the south terrace as far as the lower pond, in the manner in which my father walked with you in the summer of the year 11. He was quiet for a moment. "I did not," he said, "explain the clause to your father on that walk, Miss Harcourt. No, Your Grace, you did not. I intend in June to explain it to you. I have read it, Your Grace. I do not require the explanation." "No, Miss Harcourt, you do not." He was quiet for a further moment. Then he did an odd thing. He moved at last from the fire. He crossed the yellow drawing-room. He stopped on the other side of the small table on which, in the year 15, she had laid the letter. He did not touch the table. He did not offer her his hand. He said, in the mild voice he kept, at last, for a thing that was neither hyacinths nor corn laws, nor the arithmetic of a clause, "Miss Harcourt, may I ask a question?" "You may. I do not undertake to answer it. That is entirely fair." She waited. "May I ask you," he said, "whether the small blue sugar dish from Bath is at Rayford?" She looked at him for the space of 2 seconds. It was the last question she had expected. It was also, in the small, strange arithmetic of that afternoon, the first question he had ever asked her that she had not already, at 3 in the morning, prepared an answer to. "It is," she said. "It is on the small table by the bed in the room I had at 16. It is wrapped in a piece of flannel, which is at present missing its other half." He inclined his head. He did not smile. He did not permit himself, at that moment, the contention of a smile. He said, in the mild voice which was, at last, the mild voice of the man she had been, at 3 in the morning, waiting for, "Then, Miss Harcourt, I shall not send hyacinths." "No, Your Grace." She turned. She drew on her gloves finger by finger in the order she had been taught, and she did not rush any of them. At the door of the yellow drawing-room she stopped. She did not turn around. "Your Grace." "Yes, Miss Harcourt. The other half of the flannel." "Yes. Bring it in June." She went out. On the drive home, in her own carriage, she had at last ordered her own carriage, in her own name, out of the 1,200 a year, which was, at last, all hers. She folded her gloves into her lap, with the tranquil efficiency of a woman who had, at last, closed the last of them. There is a clause in a will that no one, in the end, remembered to mention to anyone. There is a duke who did not, in the year 12, ask a girl of 16 to marry him, and who has been asked, in the year 16, to walk with a woman of 24, from the South Terrace to the Lower Pond in June. And there is a woman who is, at this very moment, in the shallow bowl of the park at Rayford, in the room she had at 16, unwrapping a small blue sugar dish from Bath from a piece of flannel that is, at present, missing its other half. The rooks stayed in the elms. The rain went on, stories told with serene love. There was a letter without a date, and a season that did not know its own name. There was a debt in a clause that the drawing-rooms of London would not name. She folded her fear in silence. She chose the road that no one would see. It was so, without a promise, that two strangers met in the cold. He, the man that London had judged in the wrong. She, the woman who learned, in her own hour, to trust again. There was a letter without a date, and a season that did not know its own name. There was a debt in a clause that the drawing-rooms of London would not name. She folded her fear in silence. She chose the road that no one would see. It was so, without a promise, that two strangers met in the cold. He, the man that London had judged in the wrong. She, the woman who learned, in her own hour, to trust again. If stories like this keep you company in the night, leave a comment and a subscription. It is what keeps them being told here. This is a work of fiction set in Regency England. Any resemblance to real persons or events is pure coincidence.